Hello and welcome to another exciting, action-packed episode of Castle Title TV. I'm your host, David Kramer, President and General Counsel of Castle Title in fabulous Baltimore, Maryland. I am excited to be here with you today because of a very time-sensitive issue that I've gotten a lot of questions about from clients, things they want to know about. I've actually heard the same topic brought up on some local radio shows, and it's really something that is on a lot of people's minds, so we're going to hopefully clear the air. But before we do that, we're going to go to the viewer mailbag. Jim writes, David, again, nice job. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate the comments, and please keep them coming. They're valuable, they're important, and it's really what makes the show all worth doing. You, the viewer. My title revolutionaries. How are the new rules with banks and their appraisers affecting title companies? Fantastic, fantastic question, Jim. We're going to actually have an appraiser come on the little title show here sometime in the very near future to talk about appraisers, talk about appraisals, and to talk about appraisal rules. What I can tell you as far as how they're impacting title companies, not good, because there is no relationship anymore, for the most part, between appraisers and loan officers, which at first blush sounds like a great thing. There's complete independence. There's not going to be any more appraisal fraud. No more, hey Bob, can you make this property worth another $30,000? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That kind of stuff really has pretty much gone by the wayside, which I think is fantastic. But at the end of the day, because there's such wide varying independence between the appraisers and their clients, namely the loan officers, I think what that's ultimately done to do is serve a disservice to the public, because appraisers are now basically under-appraising properties. They're finding values that are incredibly low, not necessarily what I would consider justified to be a fair market value, because you have to remember, an appraisal is just that. It's one person's belief as to what the fair market value of your property is. But what really something is worth is what somebody else is willing to pay for it. And because appraisers are finding these ridiculously low values because they know that their clients aren't going to fire them anymore because there's such independence, and because appraisers are now under these new guidelines required to look at properties that have sold within the last 90 days, they're not taking into account any more short sales, they're not taking into account any more foreclosures, they're not taking into account more extenuating circumstances like the Joneses had to move to Kentucky on the quick because, you know, Bob got a new job and he just had to go, and it didn't matter what they sold the house for because the employer that he worked for made it worth his while to move. And so at the end of the day, these low values are really kind of hurting the market. I mean, I really think that what happened in years past where these appraisers were coming up with crazy high, artificial numbers also didn't really help the market, and explains a lot of the problems we're having today. So I think what's ultimately going to happen, and what needs to happen, is the pendulum needs to swing back and rest somewhere in the middle between crazy values and artificially, ridiculously low values to put property prices where they belong, and that people will be able to refi, people will be able to sell, people will be able to move, and people won't be so upside down. But that is a great question, Jim, and we're going to definitely talk about appraisals more in some coming episodes. Today's episode is going to be all about Tenancy, the volunteer state, a fabulous state located in the southeastern portion of our country. No, Tennessee is a fabulous state. I've been there. I love it. It's beautiful, wonderful people. We're going to talk about tenancy today. Tenancy is how title is titled, how it is actually owned, and what legal rights the different types of tenancy give you. First and foremost, you have sole ownership. It's really the easiest way to buy property if you're an individual. You own it, you own 100% of the interest, you can will it to whoever you want, it's just you and nobody else. Bam, done. Next, we have tenants in common. Now, a tenant in common basically means that you own some portion of the property that you're free to do with whatever you choose. You can will it, you can sell it, you can transfer it. And basically, you and the other tenants in common, if you add up your percentage of ownership interest, it's going to add up to 100%. So you can buy a property with a friend and each own 50% of it, you can own 20% of it, and they could own 80% of it. How's that for math? You can check it, it adds up, 20 and 80 is 100. And what's good about tenants in common is that you're free to do with the property, free to dispose of the property, you can sell your interests to whoever you want, you don't need the other person's authorization or consent, you can put it in your will. giving my 20% interest in Blackacre to Bob Jones at my death, and Bob would then have a 20% interest in the property at your death. Plain and simple. Next, we're going to go into joint tenants. Joint tenants is a little bit different because each person owns an individual equal share in the property. If you have two people as joint tenants, then basically the property is owned 50% by each of them, and at one person's death, the other party is going to have a full interest in the property, 100%. And if you have three people owning a property, basically if you have three people owning a property, each of them has a 1/3 interest in the property, and at the death of one of the joint tenants, both of the remaining parties would have indivisible 50% interest. And you really cannot will your interest in a property that is joint tenants because you own it as joint tenants with the other people on title. And therefore, if you were to put in your will, at my death, I wish my interest in Blackacre to go to Bob Jones, and Bob, at your death, you own the property as joint tenants with Sally Smith. You're basically, Sally Smith now owns the property as sole owner, and what you willed away is not going to be actually happen because the joint tenancy with Sally Smith would control and be ahead and looked at first and foremost ahead of your estate. Excuse me. Next, we're going to talk about tenants by the entireties. I frankly think this is a really neat little legal vehicle to own property. It's not allowed in all states. It's allowed in probably a little less than half of them. Maryland, for example, does allow you to own property as tenants by the entirety, as does the District of Columbia, as does Pennsylvania. Not super popular out west. I want to say the most, well, Alaska I believe allows it, maybe Wyoming, but a lot of the western states really don't allow it. What is tenants by the entirety? Tenants by the entirety is the same thing as joint tenants, except it's only two people that own the property and they must be married. Now, why is that important? Well, the reason that I think it's important is because if you're tenants by the entirety, you may not encumber your property with a lien unless the other tenant in common approves of it. So, let's go for an example that you're driving along in your car and you have a car accident. If you own your property as tenants by the entireties by your spouse, a judgment is not going to attach to your property because you own it as tenants by the entirety. If, let's say, you own property as tenants by the entirety and your wife goes out and takes a mortgage and you don't sign off on it, it's not going to attach as a lien on the property because you're tenants by the entirety. Now, if you and your wife go out and do something collectively and are both sued, then if you're both sued together and a judgment is found against both of you, in those instances, yes, the judgment can attach to the property. But I think that tenants by the entirety affords you a little bit better protection than just being joint tenants, because again, if both parties aren't collectively part of the judgment, or both parties haven't collectively agreed to the mortgage or the lien, then they aren't going to attach and your property is safe. And frankly, whenever we can title property as joint tenants because there's married parties, that's exactly what we do, because it really is in the best interest of our clients to do that. So that will be our little brief episode today of tenancy, and I appreciate you as watching as always, and I welcome you to leave comments, to follow me on Twitter, KramerD at twitter.com, and join the title revolution. Please pass this video along, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, let them know we are here, because the bigger this gets, and this is growing by the day, the better the show is going to be. Until then, I'll see you.